Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Oh yes, we all have. We would have our name cards put out, but since there are no tables, I shall introduce everyone, so not to worry. You heard reference many times this morning to the International Dialogue on State Building and Peacebuilding, and this is the place to be if you want to hear a little bit more about that and get into some depth around what it has achieved so far and where it goes from here. My name is Heba Ali. I'll be your moderator until lunch. I run a news organization called IRIN, which reports about humanitarian crises around the world. And I think the reason I'm here is that our journalists amplify the voices of those affected by crises. We analyze the root causes, as the minister mentioned this morning, and we explore the humanitarian aid architecture that responds to them. And that architecture is becoming more and more complex and requiring more and more integration between humanitarian and peacebuilding and all the various silos that were already highlighted today. In particular, I think Minister Wallström talked about the importance of research on root causes and conflict analysis, and that's what we try to do to inform policymakers about the realities on the ground. So please do visit our website, subscribe to get our free digest. It's irinnews.org. And in particular, we're now planning a new project that will look at what works vis-a-vis peacebuilding and trying to highlight some examples locally on the ground from a journalistic perspective that can help complement some of the research that has been ongoing over the last few months and years. So do keep an eye out for that. And since we are in Stockholm, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you, Ulrika, for the Swedish government's strong partnership with IRIN over the years. Our work wouldn't be possible without you, and that kind of sustained support has been extremely helpful in doing the work that we do. So thank you very much. So on to the subject of today. Our work at IRIN has found a clear link between crises and the ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And 1 decade ago, states came together in the recognition that fragile states needed a different approach to development and that we couldn't apply the same template if the SDGs, or back then the MDGs, were really to leave no one behind. Please feel free to come to the front. There are a few seats up here. And so the International Dialogue on Peacebuilding and Statebuilding brought together countries affected by conflict and fragility, the G7+ that you heard about this morning, development partners and civil society to promote peacebuilding and statebuilding, in particular in fragile states. And in 2011, this platform gave birth to the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States, which sets out 5 principles on how to do development more effectively in these kinds of contexts, fostering inclusive political settlements, strengthening security, addressing injustice, a lot of the themes we heard already this morning, generating employment, encouraging equitable and accountable service delivery. And members of the International Dialogue then managed to get the peace-related goal included in the SDGs, and which I think was seen to be a really big success. And then you heard again Jan this morning referencing the dual resolutions that were passed in 2016 regarding the Sustaining Peace Agenda, which quote-unquote gave prevention an uncontested home. So there has clearly been some progress. We've now seen, again, the principles of the New Deal resurfacing in the Pathways for Peace report that you've again heard referenced many times. And so I think the International Dialogue has clearly had an impact in shaping views at the policy level. But at least from my perspective, I'm quite interested to see, has it had an impact in changing the lives of people on the ground? We have today representatives from the 3 constituencies of the International Dialogue, so OECD DAC donors, the G7+ group of fragile and conflict affected states, and civil society. And I think many of you in the room will also have valuable input, and we will have a chance to have that exchange. So I'm going to get us started. The goal is really to reflect on the experiences of the collaboration of the International Dialogue, the challenges that it has faced, and the opportunities that lie ahead. And I'll start first with you, Ulrika. So Ulrika Moderator is the State Secretary for International Development, Cooperation and Climate Change in the Swedish government. And as you saw in the big prize handover ceremony, was the co-chair of the International Dialogue for the last 3 years. What have you learned in that process? What lessons can you share from us, with us from your experience as co-chair?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to mention why we took the decision to take on the co-chairmanship of the International Dialogue. We all know in this forum that we have in the past decade seen a number of conflicts, an increasing number, but also that this has resulted in protracted crisis and that we will have the majority of the people living in poverty and perhaps those who are actually the ones when we're talking about people left behind with regard to the Agenda 2030 in protracted crisis and conflict-ridden countries. And since Sweden is a champion with regard to development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, we wanted to see that we could sharpen through lessons learned our development cooperation, both as an important partner in the multilateral cooperation, but also bilaterally. And we had the opportunity to take on the co-chairmanship of a dialogue that had been going on based on, as you were saying, principles, based on practices and the principles that were decided way back, but that we have seen since we took the responsibility as a co-chair that it's even more needed in the world of today. Because even though we need to be more efficient and understand how to be efficient in the most difficult areas to work, donors do not behave in a very responsible way. So I think that we have seen that at the same time as we need more efficiency, we have actually seen a tendency of many donors to back off from both lessons learned that actually resulted in the principles. And this was also the reason why we decided to have focus on renewing the principles with the Stockholm Declaration a couple of years back.
Can you give us an example of that?
Well, I think that there is less discussions about local ownership and the importance of local ownership as key to sustainable results. When you are at the international fora like this, among practitioners, of course, this is what we talk about. But at the political level, there is less emphasis on ownership and the other principles with regard to inclusiveness, but also coordination. We have, of course, also seen with regard to civil society participation, a situation where we had very interesting participation in the run-up towards the Sustainable Development Goals, but at the same time in many member states, and since then, not least, we have seen a shrinking space that is shrinking every day. And of course, the principles are not only about coordination among donors and the importance of local ownership in order to build sustainable results, but actually also about inclusiveness with regard to civil society participation. So times are changing, and we're moving both forward and back at the same time, I believe. And I think that what you were saying, that these lessons learned and the principles have been used both in the work with the Goal 16, but also in the Pathways for Peace. When we read all these reports and we discuss this in these kind of fora, we all say that this was actually discussed 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was already decided upon. But now we need to, and this was also what you said at the end, to show in practice that this is actually the only way to bring forward effective support and coordination. And we have, of course, concrete examples. I think Somalia is one of them, where we have seen that Sweden has also, through our bilateral cooperation, emphasized the importance of coordination and local ownership to see to that we can in the long term support the Somali government in their endeavor to see to that they can build institutions that will be crucial for the state building that Somalia is in.
A sobering view, because normally on these panels I have to convince panelists not to give me the rosy picture and to be a bit more honest, so I'm glad you did the opposite. Okay. But well, keep the mic for a minute. I mean, one of the challenges I think with the dialogue was a lack of indicators around what constitutes success and how do you measure progress. So from your position as co-chair, how, you know, there are obviously some lessons learned around local ownership and some of the things you just mentioned, but how do you assess progress on the whole towards the agenda that you set out for at the beginning of your co-chairmanship?
Well, I strongly believe with regard to indicators that talking about local ownership, they actually need to be built also in the country and in the specific context. The principles, I believe, can be used in a very broad way and in many different contexts. But to have the local ownership and to have really good and strong coordination by the different actors, we can, of course, have a look at the lessons learned and the indicators being developed, but at the same time, they need to be developed in the country or in the local context in order to be good indicators with regard to progress.
Great. I'm going to turn next to Habib, so I'll hand you the mic already. Habib Mayar is the Deputy Secretary General of the G7 Plus grouping, which, as you've heard, brings together countries affected by conflict or recovering from conflict. And the G7 Plus was established, as I understand it, to give voice to these countries and allow them a platform for South-South exchange, lessons learned, cooperation and support. And you personally have been involved in this international dialogue since its inception. So very keen to hear your perspective. As journalists, we're generally quite skeptical of these big policy agreements because we're on the ground, and IRIN in particular, we're on the ground, and we often, speaking to people who are actually affected in these countries, don't see a lot of progress as a result of some of these big frameworks. So I'd love to hear from you what you think the international dialogue has achieved for people on the ground.
Thank you, Heba, and very good morning to all of you. First of all, allow me to speak briefly on the G7 Plus itself as one of the constituencies of this big international dialogue forum. As you rightly mentioned, it's the unique group of countries which are affected by conflict and fragility. An intergovernmental group of 20 countries that was established as an informal association in 2010, but now it has evolved into a more formal organizations, which has 3 objectives in its agenda. One is to advocate for the needs of the people in these countries, because sometimes, I mean, everybody would know the needs of these people, but the narrative that is provided, or the narrative that is to frame these needs, are different. That has not reflected on what we think we need. It's always what we are told that what we need. And these have shaped the policies of the international engagement in these countries. And the second objective was to share experiences in these countries. If you look at these 20 member countries, all of them are at the bottom billion portion of the ladder of development. But still there are a lot of tremendous knowledge that these countries can share with each other. And we have this model of, we call it fragile to fragile cooperation, sharing of experiences, peer learning, and also cooperating. I will mention a couple of the examples of that. Since the inception of the G7 Plus, through this forum, we have facilitated members to cooperate tangibly with each other. One of the ones, I mean, I would be proud to mention, we facilitated dialogue in Central African Republic through our member countries. And the former Prime Minister of Timor-Leste, who is considered as a champion of peace, went there and he spoke to all the factions and facilitated that dialogue. And again, the government of Timor-Leste, again under the platform of the G7 Plus, supported election in Guinea-Bissau. And one of the uniqueness of that support was the international community estimated the cost of election in Guinea-Bissau would be more than $35 million. And when the government of Timor-Leste went with its team on the platform of the G7 Plus, they estimated the cost would be only $7 million. And they were ready and they supported that, they provided that assistance, and the election were conducted there. And similarly, during the Ebola crisis and also in Sao Tome and Principe, we share experiences on the public finance management, on the natural resources, and also on peace and reconciliation. And the third objective was also to collectively voice the priorities of these countries. We provide, if you look at these countries, we include countries which are, of the population of 1 million, they are, excluded, they are 8 orphans. And in this big international forum, it's very difficult for their voice to be heard. So we speak on behalf of each other and we collectively advocate for our collective needs. Now, coming to the international dialogue, this forum has provided an opportunity to us to voice and to communicate our needs to the international community. And again, I'm proud to say, and we all have to be proud to say about all these 3 constituencies, that whatever we are hearing today out of these resolutions that were passed in the UN in 2015 and 16, and the Agenda 2030, the Sustaining Peace Agenda, these are not new for us. We are not surprised in a say that we were the ones who raised these issues back in 2010. In 2011, these were, embedded in the New Deal for engagement in fragile states. And of course, that's a different story whether we it got that much global attraction or attention or not. But we have to be proud that what we were saying years ago are now kind of recognized more formally at the global level. And this is one of at the policy level, I think this is one of the biggest achievements that the international dialogue has had so far. But definitely there are a long way to go, and we need to keep convincing people that these are the right principles that we have been saying. One of the challenges in the international arena is that things get into fashion and then it gets out of fashion. It fades away. And the reason is we come with new jargons and we come with new, theories or with new terminologies. But when we go to the roots, these were the things that you heard the three ministers that they were talking about: the ownership, the contextual sensitivity, and the effectiveness of aid that is being, and also sustaining of peace. It means investment. That is what we have been advocating through the New Deal, peacebuilding and state-building goals, and Minister Lovin mentioned. So these were some of the at the policy level, I would say. At the country level, of course, we have had some challenges. And again, Somalia, as you rightly mentioned, is one of the classic example where the New Deal, which came out of the international dialogue process, provided a framework which was unprecedented in that case. And it provided a mechanism for coordination. Similarly, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, and in Afghanistan, for example, the use of the country system, that was the signing of the compact. These were all the principles of the New Deal that we used. I hope I have answered your first question.
Partly, yeah. I suppose when you talk about, for example, the Somalia case, in the New Deal providing a framework, that still for me is at kind of the policy level. So how has that implemented itself, or how does that change at a kind of operational level, the way things are done?
Well, I will get back to you. We'll get you back to where I said about the policy level. So in Somalia, for example, the New Deal was used as one of the frameworks. It was the main framework that was providing a coordination mechanism for the international, community's engagement there. But as I stated about the challenge that it has not been integrated fully in all these, the donors' policies to change or to affect the lives of the people. For example, you still see the government institutions, the state institutions, I would say, just to make it broader, being, neglected in providing the assistance. And on the achievement side, the local civil society, the local NGOs. For example, one of the challenges again in Somalia was a huge presence of international NGOs, which it's fair, they are providing support and humanitarian support. They have been playing a very critical role. But the local actors were completely, they had been neglected over there. They are not that much on the ground. And when we say how it affects the lives of the people, is that it's directly, for example, if you work through the local partners, they're the ones who are the interface between the people in the international community, rather than if you work through international organizations, which may or may not have that much in-depth knowledge or in-depth, contextual realities of the people of the country. And now, again, on the people's level, I would say, bringing back the Central African Republic example. If anybody of you have been to, Joran has been to Central African Republic with us in one of the missions. The moment you would land in the airport of Bangui, you would see, the internally displaced people living just right in the Bangui airport. And again, under the fragile to fragile cooperation, the government of Timor-Leste supported them to shift these people to a better place rather than in the airport. You would see when the plane would land, and then you would see the people, like they had to avoid those people from coming to the runway, the kids, and it was a miserable situation. And this was done through a very little G7 plus, and I can assure you that if we join forces in this kind of endeavors, where we understand that we need a solution in the way that we perceive it, not the way that international community sees it. Because different countries, different organizations, different actors have their own perspective into shaping the narratives around the fragility. So what we are trying to do is that you don't need to tell us how to solve it. You just need to support us to solve the problems in a way that we think is critical for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Support from the crowd. I'm going to turn to Peter now, who is another veteran of the International Dialogue. Peter van Schlausch, and he will tell you afterwards how to properly pronounce that, is the coordinator of the Civil Society Platform for Peacebuilding and Statebuilding, which is one of the International Dialogue's key stakeholder groups. there's a lot of discussion outside about the need for breaking silos and being more inclusive in all of these processes. And I think everyone in this room will be quite familiar with the need for civil society to be engaged when we're talking about peace building, as Habib also just referred to. And I think when you can go into it a bit more, but when the International Dialogue was first launched, that was one of the criticisms, that civil society wasn't participating enough. And since then, the platform has been created to fill that gap. How has the dialogue contributed to a more inclusive approach, if it has, and where has it failed to do so, and what would you do differently moving forward?
Thank you, and welcome to everybody. Just before answering that question,
they all want to not answer my questions. You see how
I'm going to answer your question,
kidding.
but I just want to also give a bit of an introduction on the platform. I mean, the civil society's involvement has been from the start on when the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States was constituted, and we have been a proud partner of the International Dialogue. And the mere fact, I mean, and answering your question, the mere fact that we are seen as one of the formalized constituencies in the International Dialogue is already good for us in terms of securing the inclusiveness of that process. And it has been helping us in having a seat around the table in the International Dialogue process to bring across points which we think are needed to be discussed, or where we see ourselves contributing as civil society to the process. Civil society has been active in this discussion from the start on, when the Busan Agreement was reached. And gradually, like Habib said, I mean, the G7 Plus has gone through a process of becoming more professionalized, so to say. I think that civil society has also, through 10 years experiences in the International Dialogue, has also become a solid partner in the dialogue process, as we have been for the last 10 years. There have been challenges, though. I mean, Ulrika referred to the shrinking space. The mere fact that we are a formalized partner in the International Dialogue doesn't mean that on the ground we are not facing challenges. And I think, although all these countries, member states of the G7 Plus, have committed themselves to the peacebuilding and state-building goals, there's still challenges in the actual implementation of some of those principles. The inclusion bit is a crucial one for us, of course. I mean, we don't want to be left behind in that sense in the discussions taking place on peace building and state building. And if you have to struggle each time to actually have a seat secured in discussions with policy stakeholders at country level, it's difficult. So it's not a given, so to say, that becoming part of the International Dialogue structure would allow for us to be part and parcel of discussions taking place. But there have been some milestone experiences, I think. I mean, Somalia one is a good example, and I must say I don't agree with Habib saying that the civil society, the local civil society, was not involved. I think they have been actively involved, and I think that where NGOs, international NGOs, have stepped in is in this situation where government institutions were not sufficiently equipped to actually address some of the challenges, and then where civil society then becomes a service provider. But local civil society in the process, the political process of discussions happening in Somalia, was certainly involved. And also through the support of the government of Sweden, I think they were capacitated to actually become a partner in the dialogue process.
So how, in this landscape of shrinking civil society space around the world, which is, I think, becoming more and more extreme every year, do you navigate, so moving forward on the international dialogue and civil society's contribution in it, in this current landscape, where do you see the kind of leverage points or entry points to try to open up that space?
The mere fact of talking about it is already a start, I think. I mean, the fact that you have open communication channels with both donors and the governments of G7 Plus countries is already a recipe for having that discussion on the table and actually address some of the issues where we are confronted with. And it's also very practical terms. I mean, having civil society to engage at an international level requires a visa, and all these kind of visa processes are becoming more and more complicated to get people actually out of their country, secure a visa, be able to voice the concerns of civil society at the international level. I mean, but we can address that through donor contacts and through G7 Plus contacts, and there's workarounds around it. But I mean, it is an indication. It's an indicator of that shrinking space. At the same time, it's by addressing the issue and by bringing it into the dialogue context is also a way of addressing it in a more effectively and joint way. And I think that with the Stockholm Declaration coming into place, reaffirming the importance of the peace-building and state-building goals, and also giving prominent attention to the women, peace and security agenda, but also youth inclusion. These are very important elements where we have been, I think, also influencing the agenda of the international dialogue, saying, okay, we need to be cognizant of those factors of inclusion. Does not mean it's not a tokenistic approach, but it should be meaningful, active, continuous inclusion of civil society in all aspects of the work we're doing. And I had a bit of a déjà vu this morning in terms of hearing the opening panel. I mean, this was all New Deal talk, what we're hearing. And we reaffirmed it 2 years ago in the Stockholm Declaration. We can reaffirm it again, but we have to do some action and get going on it and make sure that we live through those principles and actually start producing results.
So that's a good segue to Larissa, who is the Director General of Peace and Stabilization Operations at the Canadian government, which is now taking over the co-chairmanship of the New Deal. Now, we've heard all three of the speakers say that these are old discussions. And actually, this morning at breakfast, I told a colleague who works in the peace-building sector that I was moderating this panel. And he said, oh, does the international dialogue still exist? So what do you think is the relevance of the international dialogue today, given that these discussions have been going on and on for so many years? And then maybe after that we can get into some of your priorities in your new capacity as co-chair.
Thanks.
Sorry for the difficult question.
Okay. In terms of the relevance, well, I think that the gathering today is evidence of its relevance, and the resolutions on sustaining peace in the Security Council and General Assembly are evidence of its relevance. I think the demands coming from civil society, the stronger voice and platform of the G7 plus are evidence that of the relevance. And I really liked the line this morning that nobody can do everything, but everyone can do something. And I think this platform is the embodiment of the main constituent parts of fragile and conflict-affected states coming together to try to do something better together. And in fact, that's what attracted Canada to the opportunity to become the co-chair, to take the co-chairmanship lead from Sweden, is because this brings together the only way that you can find solutions to complex problems. And conflict and fragility are increasingly complex, and so all the more reason. And I think what was done in 2011 with the New Deal, I think the hard work that Sweden did in recommitting to those principles in 2015, 2016, was really important. And I think the moment we have right now is to take all of that and to marry it with a very practical, very evidence-based, data-based recommendations coming out of the UN and World Bank report on pathways for peace. And perhaps that's where we can amplify again the voice of this particular platform, is by marrying it to what's coming out of pathways, and because it gives some very concrete ideas, also concrete rationales for working in inclusive ways, working horizontally, working across silos. And so I think that, while we are only today, we think about an hour ago with a handshake, took over the co-chair role. We have many discussions with all the constituent parts and our partners, and with Sierra Leone as co-chair on what the priorities will be. I think one of them has to be accountability for changing behavior in light of all the evidence, in light of all the talk, in light of all the political commitment. And this is where I think the Government of Canada also also has demonstrated already in its feminist international assistance policy and its feminist foreign policy that a lot of political commitment is important. But unless you see change in behavior, unless you see changes in activities, the results won't be there. And then I think we just eat away at that hope that people want to have, that people are born to have, that people have a right to have if we don't deliver results. So I think that answers maybe some of your question.
Yeah, no, I think because I guess this, you mentioned earlier we're actually heading in some cases in the opposite direction. There's this, do we need a New Deal 2.0? The fact that the Stockholm Declaration had to reaffirm its commitment to these principles, it feels like, yes, there's a lot of affirmations going on, and then what? So I'm curious if you already have an idea of what that accountability framework, to use a word that I don't like, would look like.
No.
Okay.
No, but I think that maybe Ulrika will. But I think that's what we're talking about here. I think that's how do we move from the affirmations, from the principles, from the high level talk as we see to concrete examples of how things work and how, given where and when things work, what the accountability measures ought to be. But I think that there's a good discussion to be had to continue having in the platform.
Did you want to jump in?
I was just thinking that one of the important things that I think that we did during the past year was also I don't know how to express it, because I think that the international dialogue has been really valuable in its building up on practical evidence and bringing forward principles and indicators and so on. But at the same time, it has had a lack of support with regard to that it was an initiative, OECD-led initiative. And what we did that I think was very important, and it's also in line with what you say, was that we brought it and married it with some other international processes that were going on. And I do think that the report now with the World Bank and the UN coming together is a very important window of opportunity, even though I also think that many of us would say that what's new. But it's a very good entry point, and I think that we need also to see how we can bring the lessons learned on the ground, but in relation to the principles, and make those principles work also in other international fora, as we were trying to do also in the Stockholm Conference. To bring, doesn't really, I mean, we don't have to think that this need to be only part of what was the international dialogue and the G7+, but actually work on how to bring it in and marry it to other processes, as you're saying now, and I think that is what needs to be done, because of course now rolling out the SDGs and especially Goal 16 and see how that is going to be implemented is a very important work ahead of all of us.
And to retract my earlier relevance question, when I talked about is it still relevant, it's partly because now, in a sense, it's been so successful that it's been integrated into other, so Goal 16 in a sense represents a lot of what the New Deal is about, in which case is it already taken care of, so to speak. So how do you envision, a question to any of you, linking up the dialogue with the SDGs, with the new Secretary General's conflict prevention agenda? We heard a lot about breaking down the silos and working more with the private sector and the need to work with regional organizations. Like, there's so much out there that's going on in this space. How do you pull that together? Does anyone have any radical ideas?
I think over the last years, I mean, since the Stockholm Declaration, the international dialogue has been struggling with that idea in terms of recalibrating itself also in that context of new agendas emerging, but at the same time also reaffirming that the peacebuilding and statebuilding goals and the New Deal principles are crucial also in the way you operationalize those agendas. And I think that has been our selling point in that sense, saying, okay, we need to embark when you want to implement the SDGs, you should do that in a fragile context through a New Deal principled approach. And that approach and the fact that you bring together various constituencies in a dialogue process is also a convening power which international dialogue has to bring also the alignment and the coordination and collaboration with other initiatives on the table. And through that you can make the linkages to the Global Reporting Alliance on SDG 16, you can make linkages to 16 Plus Forum, Pathfinders Initiative, all that. I mean, there's an enormous convening power in that sense that you have these three constituencies together and you can build on that. Not saying that it's perfect, but it's at least a starting point where we should build on.
And I think just the practical examples, the good examples that we have in some countries, and also the strengths of South-South cooperation that I think is of great interest for many countries as well.
Larissa, you wanted to?
You wanted to say something as well. So
yeah, I can do it.
Ladies first.
I think we've just in Canada launched our second Women, Peace and Security Action Plan, and one of the commitments we made almost to ourselves, but also in the plan. A lot of the resolutions around women, peace, and security are sort of well known and sort of integrated into a lot of different things. And one of the commitments that we made, like I said, to ourselves was to take that agenda to places where it's not being talked about, to take it into the unusual suspects forum, not the usual suspects. And I wonder, and I really do wonder, because I haven't talked to folks who have been around the platform for much longer than I have in the last hour, about whether there's an opportunity to take this dialogue into the places where it's not happening. Where are these principles not well practiced, not well espoused, not well internalized? Because no one's going to argue with them here. There isn't anyone here who disagrees. So are we spending an equal amount of time talking to others? And it's the use of those practical examples. It is the platform of partnership, of respectful dialogue that the platform offers to bring others into the discussion, perhaps that haven't been there, or that perhaps are more closer to spoilers than they are to supporters. How do you do that?
So maybe just before handing over to Heba, I mean, isn't what Ulrika was saying earlier that actually even some of those that are the quote-unquote usual suspects, i.e. the OECD DAC donors, even they're not really respecting these principles, and so let alone the wider... I mean, who are the usual suspects that are bought in, and who are the unusual suspects?
Well, I think that's where the accountability discussion will call some of that out, or could call some of that out. It needs to be done respectfully, and I think also with the knowledge that everyone has their own, as selfless as international cooperation is supposed to be, there are priorities that domestic priorities that filter into those. But at some point, there needs to be a way to measure the actions against the degree of political commitment that exists, so that there is transparency on that front.
Habib.
Thank you. Last year I was going to participate in the high-level political forum, and I was home in Afghanistan, and I was coming back from Kabul airport. They opened my bag because I had a lot of books and these buttons and things. And they were like, what are these? So I explained, and they said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to New York. There's a meeting on this, Agenda 2030. So that lady was curious, and like, what is it about? So I explained to her, and then she asked me, where is peace? People are dying here every day, you see that. And the picture that I presented, it was like, okay, we have solved everything. We have SDG 16, we have Sustaining Peace Agenda, and bingo, we are there. And I was struck by that question. It's not the first time. Every time we go and we visit these countries, we question ourselves as well, that what we are doing, if you're not contributing to the lives of the people. And now, when we are talking about this global agenda, Agenda 2030, Sustaining Peace Agenda, these have to be interpreted. They have to be translated into the lives of these people. And I think the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States is the only interpretation for SDG 16 for the Global Agenda 2030 in the context of fragility and conflict. Of course, we respect the universality of these goals. We respect the universality of the Sustaining Peace Agenda, but they have to be trickled down based on how they have to be interpreted. And the reason I mention this is that the global, the international dialogue is a unique platform where they can translate this agenda. And it can happen only if we, go beyond only talking, and if we consider how we can align our individual policies of the international community, the civil society, the governments of the G7+, to make them align with these principles. And I cannot, I wouldn't agree more with the fact of the accountability. The dialogue was one of the basic principles, or one of the basic objectives of the dialogue was to ensure accountability. We have a very unique structure. We have the opportunity to have frank discussion, and we have had these discussions. We are very frank, but it just needs to be a little bit uplifted. It has to be more than what, as you mentioned, OECD-based or OECD-centric. Let's make it more global, for example. Let's be active in New York. Let's talk to our diplomats. Let's bring our diplomats in this discussion, in this conversation, and let's convert them to the beliefs of the New Deal. Of course, this is 8 years, and looking at the ambition of the New Deal, it's still too early to talk about, what has been the outcome. But it doesn't mean complacency on our part. We have to double our efforts on how to translate them into policies.
And when will it not be too early to talk about the outcomes? What kind of time frame are you?
Well, this is very difficult. If I think about the question of that lady, I think we don't have time. And if we think about the global bureaucracy or the international bureaucracy, then we can stick. But then the whole, what is the point of all these reforms? What is the point of all these, discourse that that are taking place? So I think we don't have much time. We have to be quick.
I foolishly did not ask these guys to get mic'd up, and I realize we only have one mic for questions. So what I'll do is, pass the mic around for, let's take 3 questions, and then we'll bring it back to the panel and then send it back again out there. So I'll start with the very, our mic volunteer, thank you. I'll start with the very aggressive hand raisers in the second row.
Thank you very much. My name is Khalid Mansour, and I'm from Syria. And actually, every time I come to such forums or discussions, I just think how this is affecting people back in Syria, and how actually do we save lives. And we keep talking about exactly the same challenges and the same problems in each context, including lack of coordination among the donor community, international organizations, the ineffectiveness of the UN, the sovereignty, the humanitarian principles, all of this, and also like the role of the UN with the role of the Security Council, where everything can be actually drastically politicized. And unfortunately, in Syria, we've been saying this to the policymakers since day one, and we've been trying actually to get engaged as local actors, as practitioners, as researchers, as just, again, to have the ownership, agency, and dignity of our own conflict so we can be part of the solution. Basically, my question is, do we actually need more platforms, and do we actually need more international dialogue? Because all of us know the problems. And do we need more layers to the international architecture? Because it's already so much overwhelmed with the different layers. And how can we, for example, give hope to people in Syria, where we are in this 8th year, and of course when we listen to Somalia and other conflicts, still we are in the 8th year, and we're counting. How do we give hope to people inside the country, to the displaced Syrians, that we are actually doing something? Because for me, I just see like these discussions are just among the policymakers themselves, and actually they are not affecting people, they are not affecting peace, they are not bringing peace to the ground, and definitely they are not saving any more lives. And thank you.
Thank you. You can pass it to the gentleman right next to you.
Thank you to the last speakers. I think you touched a voice. Thank you. Let's imagine a voice that is not present.
Sorry, can you just tell us who you are first?
Oh, my name is Azril Bakan. I could say, since I have no hair, I'm a member of the International Peace Bureau and of the World Social Forum, but I have more hats than that.
2 is enough for now. Thanks.
More hats than head. So let's imagine a voice that says, aha, you want dialogue with me. Okay, stop sending us weapons. Stop producing weapons that create the violence, that displace, that expel our people to go up north where we are no longer wanted. So let's take Latin America. Costa Rica is the only country without an army. It is the one country in Latin America that most approaches what we call today sustainable development. In other ways, what I'm saying is, can we think beyond the dialogue between equal voices? Think about prescribing armies. Like Peter Nobel in this country once suggested to criminalize the production of weapons. So can we go beyond what you said right now and then speak maybe in a language that you could answer to your lady in the airport? Because if we don't, we will be meeting every year, reinforcing statements and platforms and going nowhere. Thank you.
I'm not ignoring the people on the other side of the room, but for the ease of the poor microphone volunteer, maybe the woman right next to you, and then we'll come to the other side in the next round.
Thank you. My name is Maya Rahabi from Syria also. Khalid had spoken about Syria, but I want to add something. You know about Syrian problem. There was many Security Council resolutions about Syria, speaks about a political transition. And that was the resolution for our problem. But after that, nobody speak about it. Nobody speak about political transition, but only about new constitution, new election, and the last donors conference in Brussels. Before 3 weeks, the outcome was for us very, very, I don't know what to say. They didn't speak about political transition. They didn't speak about a transitional phase, but only about a new constitution. And all these donors, they know that this regime in Syria used all kinds of weapons, even chemical weapons, against the people. We can't speak about development without sustainable peace, and there is no sustainable peace without accountability, like you said before. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we come back to the audience, thank you. I think 2 broad themes, which is again this question of how do we translate discussions that may well feel relevant to us. Actually, I can refer to the advisor to the Special Envoy for Syria of the UN, Jan Egeland, who would always say, it's the Aleppo test. Does this change anything for people in Aleppo? So how do you tackle that challenge? And then I think the second part is slightly about hypocrisy of kind of we're doing all these processes while our countries are bombing or involved in bombing or selling weapons. Partly about other approaches to addressing the issue. So getting at some of the, we talk about peace building from a development perspective, but what about from a stopping the aggressor's perspective? So who wants to tackle that?
Let me try the first question. I think the focus of the international dialogue process has not been only of having an international dialogue process, but the focus has been on making meaningful change happen on the ground. So I mean but you need to come together and have that discussion, I think, among constituencies to actually decide on what that action might be that can tackle some of the conflict problems happening in some of the countries where we work. Syria is not member of the international dialogue, but I mean it's in our heart. I mean I see it happening on the news on a daily basis, and yes, we want to see in all the countries where we work, want to see changes happening on the ground, and that's why you need to come together and have a dialogue and not resort to other means of solving the problem, I think. And so you need to have that discussion happening. On the second question, I think the importance of policy coherence is also well understood, and I think it's also a point which we from civil society have been bringing up in the international dialogue, that you need to indeed follow through on your commitments in the context of the international dialogue, not doing one thing and with the other hand indeed providing weapons or other means that will obstruct the process. So.
Well, I think that no one, or at least very few people, want to be in talk shops. We actually want to see things happening on the ground. But I do believe that policy platforms can be useful if they are platforms where we really build on evidence in order to improve our action on the ground. And I think that this is an example, not a perfect one, of course, but it is an example where this is what we have been trying to do. And I think that you were also asking initially, so, I mean, is it, what's really happening? What's the difference? But maybe, I mean, if we wouldn't have had this kind of pressure, and I like a lot the idea of bringing forward accountability, both with regard to the donor community, but also with regard to all the members of the international dialogue and the G7+, also with regard to shrinking space, for instance. Because if we wouldn't have had these kind of policy dialogues on important principles on how to bring a rights-based and effective development cooperation or humanitarian assistance and how to bridge those two and so on, it would perhaps have been even worse on the ground, and we would have acted, I'm sure, because I see a political tendency among the donors at least not to be responsible with regard to what we have learned through decades, what's actually efficient development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. And as you were saying, I mean, Syria is not part of this experience, but could perhaps be. But Sweden took an initiative on a specific strategy for also long-term engagement in Syria at an early stage. Because we did not only want to work with the humanitarian assistance as a tool, we knew from the experience in Iraq, for instance, that when the international community only works through humanitarian assistance, then we don't safeguard the local initiatives and the local institution building or at the regional level. At that time, we hoped that this strategy would be part of an international platform that could be what was a hope to rebuild Syria on a democratic and different ground than we see now. But it was also a way to show that we wanted to work with local Syrian actors throughout the conflict, and that we believed in that. And we were actually also quite heavily criticized in Sweden by the opposition in parliament, saying, so you could not have a long-term strategy in a conflict. You will then support the Assad regime. And we were saying, but we need to find, it will be difficult, but we need to find those progressive actors that actually work all throughout the conflict in order to be able to build support to peace onwards as well. Well, weapons and arms sales and policy coherence, representing also the Green Party in government, we believe it's very important. Sweden took a decision supported in Parliament on a new legislation for our arms trade and sale with the democracy criteria. It was more ambitious than the former one, but I think that work still needs to be done with regard to that. Yeah, I'll leave it like that.
Thank you. First of all, a lot of sympathies with Syria, with the people. I myself have grown in the refugee camp. We all the G7+ countries, we feel and what has been going there. And this is one of the basic foundation of the G7+ is the empathy that we all have been through that. Some of our countries are victims of, I would say, proxy war. Allow me to, I'm not going to pass my opinion. Yemen is one of them. Afghanistan, my own country, is also another example. And we know what are the posts, hopefully there will be peace soon. Hopefully there will be, a change where we can save lives. But we would like to offer our platform of sharing of experiences that what mistakes sometimes we make in that transition. My own country is one of the classic examples. We have had several, regime changes, and then how the international community, how the regional powers, they tried to change everything over there. We had sound army, we had sound institution, but they said, no, demolish it because it is based on, theories of communism or something like that. But it was whatever it was something that, with the country, we could have fixed it our way. So we can, this forum can provide that experiences or, alert that, these are some of the, we also believe in the organic, evolution within the countries. And this is one of the most important points. When the country goes through transition, everyone is trying to rush to fix things, but sometimes we create chaos, and it leads to further confusion as we go along. And secondly, yes, we don't need more forums, but we do need a forum where we can talk about these reforms. Can I be over-ambitious? I hope that this discussion on sustaining peace agenda is among the P5 of the Security Council. Can we hope for reforms in the Security Council? Because and this is where you can address these proxy wars. When the resolutions are passed.
I don't think you can hope for that.
So why not? Aren't we allowed to hope? I think we should. If you lose hope, personally speaking, believe me, if I start to lose hope on this thing, I will not be here what I'm doing. That is the only thing that keeps us encouraging. And it's not easy. It's very difficult. All this work that we all have been doing here, we have been going through, difficult situations. We go to difficult countries just because of the hope. So I think I would not let that hope die. And obviously, if you're talking about shared prosperity, global peace, then these are the questions we have to answer to them. The experts in the international politics will definitely disagree with me, but thank God I am just a common human being. I'm not one of diplomats where I can speak of that, but I'm just a citizen that I can hope. Thank you.
That's applause for your hope. We all enjoy. I think this isn't a new platform. This isn't another platform. This is a platform that exists for some time and that I think has some very tangible, concrete outcomes in its past as a result of the format that it's taken and the approach that it's taken and how it has brought together constituencies. And I think I would hope that a number of countries have taken what's come out of this platform and actually applied it to how we're working in Syria. I will speak to Canada's approach because it's very much like Sweden's approach. But there was a time when we wouldn't be active in a country that has the kind of conflict going on in it that Syria does right now. And I can tell you that Canada is active in that country to support those voices, to be prepared, to help constituencies prepare for when peace comes and the next thing has to happen. It's in fact that I come to these forums and I talk a high-level policy, but I'm also responsible for a large operational program that supports stabilization in countries like Syria and like Iraq, and it's on the front burner for Canada because we now have I think closing in on 50,000 Syrians living in Canada. There is a domestic constituency interested in what happens there, and it's whether it's Syria or elsewhere, other countries that we have to ask ourselves, how does this talk benefit them? I think that we go back to our offices and we all do a lot more than just work on the platform. But the ideas, the encouragement, the hope, the desires that we hear trickle down into the other things that we do.
That idea of leveraging domestic constituencies is interesting. Okay, so let's go back, if I can bother you again. Thank you very much. To the far end, yes, our friend in blue.
Thank you very much for giving me the mic. My name is...
I couldn't avoid you.
Thank you. I was struggling very well. Well, my name is Imam Babali from the Gambia. I happen to be a member of our local organization called Transitional Brain Trust Group. And I do appreciate the presenters early morning. One of them said, we are not highlighting our achievements. We rarely recognize them, which is true. And being a Gambian and being one of the victims of that kind of regime we had there, and knowing fully well the intervention of the international community did to Gambia and what they achieved, I really feel it needs to be highlighted. Because hadn't been timely intervention, what happened in Sierra Leone, what happened in Liberia, could have happened in the Gambia or worse than that, knowing fully well that Gambia has a very small population, less than 2 million people. Secondly, I have a sort of clumsy at times ideas thinking about the donor and the West. In my view, excuse my language, in my view, they play a lot of double standards. They highlight where they want to highlight, the rest is under the carpet. Why I said that, issues happening in Yemen. I'm somebody who knows the Arab world very well, and I traveled so many countries in the Arab world, and I was in Washington, D.C., working with refugees from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Syria, when I myself as an asylee there. So that gives another privilege to know their problems. Seeing what is happening in Yemen, we all know it's a proxy war, and what is happening there is not less than what is happening in Syria, but you rarely had somebody mention it, especially in the international forums. And life is life. There is no difference between the lives. So I feel those type of issues also should be part of our agenda, being peace making or peace builders. And really we appreciate, I don't want to take all the time because I have a lot of things to talk about, but I will have my forum.
You'll find them
too.
after the panel as well.
Yeah, so I will say thank you very much, and I hope we will work more closely, and let us not imagine or underrate the efforts we are doing. There are millions of people benefiting from the efforts of Sweden, because we all know Sweden, whether we like it or not, they have set so many examples for peace building and for bringing the world under one umbrella of peace, unlike other powerful countries. Thank you.
Habib's optimism is spreading. Very good. I'll come to the corner here. Yes.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I should speak. I'm the coordinator of the International Dialogue Secretariat, so I'm a bit biased. But I just wanted to say one thing in terms of how the thinking within the dialogue about what it has to offer. And I think learning from mistakes is also really important in terms of putting on the map some of the challenges that are likely to face those who are in the business of implementing the commitments that we all seem to have built a consensus around. We've learned in the dialogue that political support, sustaining high-level political support is key to being able to move forward on anything. And some of the difficulties that countries have had in implementing the New Deal or according to New Deal principles is precisely because the levels of political commitment it's been difficult to maintain. So how then, what do you do in a situation like that? Because it's great that everyone's waving the flags for the SDG 16 and sustaining peace and prevention now, but when it actually comes to the nitty-gritty of actually implementing this, which is very, very difficult, interest might wane. So what we're also thinking is that building coalitions with others, building out the partnerships, as Larissa said, is one way, in ways that we haven't possibly imagined, new kinds of partnerships, thinking outside the box is one way of perhaps trying to bring pressure to bear to maintain that political momentum. I think it's really important, that's a lesson, or that's a value added that a platform like the dialogue could offer in terms of levering not just the principles, but what we've actually learned about how tough it actually is to do this.
The lady in white in the middle, and then we'll come to you.
Thank you. I'm Annelise Clausen, and I'm a partner in the Nordic Consulting Group. Before that, I used to be the focal point in the World Bank for the IDPS. First of all, I want to congratulate Sweden for having done a great job for 3 years. Being a Nordic citizen, I look at Denmark and Finland. They were there very short. So I think that that's really a great job that Sweden has done. Now looking forward, and now I'm looking at Canada, I think it really shows that the IDPS is still alive. I want to make a couple of points. The first point is on inclusivity. I think that the New Deal partners have done a great job. And let me give you an example. I think the New Deal was not really putting gender equality in there, right at the center, as it should probably have done in 2011. But I think that the constituencies of the IDPS have prevented gender equality from falling off the table again and again throughout. And I think now with Canada as the chair, I hope you will continue that together with the G7 Plus and civil society to all the time pick it up when it's about to fall off. The second point I'd like to make is about incentives for change. One thing we don't talk about is how the New Deal actually set out 8 pilot countries. There was good experience there, but then it was as if after 5 years, these pilot countries, they disappeared. And now we just, forget about it almost. And I think that in the new agendas on sustaining peace, taking the pilot idea forward again, I think would be one way to actually bridge from the high-level policy platforms to implementation. Thank you.
Great. And one last comment from the gentleman, and then we'll take a last round from the panel.
Thank you. My name's Karthik Sharma. I work for the International Development Law Organization. I've followed IDPS with a lot of interest. I was in one of the pilot countries, South Sudan, and we had just had a meeting about a local framework to implement it, I think 2 days before conflict started in 2013. And I think that this kind of forum has a lot to offer, particularly in the context of having its ideas now being recognized on the global space, as was mentioned earlier in the context of SDG 16. But we've discussed dialogue with great specificity, and where we always seem to kind of get fuzzy is when we talk about implementation and accountability. And where, at least in my view, I see this kind of forum playing a very productive role is helping to articulate what SDG 16 means. There are common frameworks for health, sanitation, for kind of the MDG type goals of development. But because we're talking about things like justice, human rights, governance, which are inherently political, we tend to step back and be very fuzzy about implementation. And I think that's something that a genuine dialogue that's not necessarily fostered from donors onto recipients, but it brings all parties together, can really help accomplish. That's just something I want to say.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for all those who have more questions, but I'm going to try to wrap up so that you can make it to your next session.
Can I take the liberty of making a comment since
you
volunteered
did the
to... Right.
I can't stop you, really.
So my name is Wale Oshofison.
He had an incentive to help, you see.
Yeah, my name is Wale Oshofison. I'm the Deputy Director for Governance Programs with the International Rescue Committee based in London. I just want to chime in around the policy to practice question. And I have to give a lot of credit to the Swedish government. So SIDA, for example, is funding IRC to actually implement a peacebuilding and conflict prevention program in Somalia, in Mogadishu. And the focus is access to justice. And we're partnering with the Benedea Regional Administration, which is the government, right? So we're working with them to train local courts, at the district level in 2 districts in Mogadishu. So that's just one example. The other thing I want to say is, it's just an idea. We talk about accountability, evidence. We're also trying to build the evidence base on peace building and conflict prevention through this program. And hopefully, in a couple of years, we'll be able to share some of those results. But the other thing, on the bigger scale, I think we need to think about collective outcomes. Right? Collective outcomes. So, and collective outcomes, not just, with INGOs and the donors, but also with the government itself. How do we own these outcomes? How do we have measurable indicators to track progress? If we agree, for example, with the government of Somalia, that, right, okay, you own this outcome, we'll provide technical assistance, we'll work together as one team, then we'll begin to make some progress. Just an idea I just want to put out there. Thank you.
Wonderful. So maybe let's start from this side. I'll quickly recap what I think are the questions, and then you can also add any last-minute or concluding remarks and do all of that, address all the questions and your remarks in 2 minutes each. That would be wonderful. So I think the question, again, coming back to the credibility of some of the actors involved in the dialogue and the double standards, and how to ensure a depoliticization while at the same time kind of taking into account the inherent politics. Second question around how to sustain political support in situations that are complex and where the solution is not always shiny and easy to sell to the public, I would imagine. Third, around inclusiveness, and I think the question was rather around kind of incentives for change and whether pilot countries could be used more effectively to help create those incentives. Question around the role that the forum can play in shaping accountability and implementation. And then I think that's quite linked to the suggestion we just heard at the end. Over to you.
Okay. Let me just say a little bit more about why Canada has taken on this role, and I think it'll speak a little bit to everything that you've just raised. First of all, very happy to take on from one feminist foreign policy government to another the handoff, and to say we won't make sure it doesn't fall off the table. We're going to make sure it never leaves the center of the table, and because there is so much still to do to make sure that 100% of the population's needs and experiences and contributions can be discussed, and that it's only by reframing, by looking at through a gender lens at the same old problems that we're going to find new solutions. I think ditto on youth. So we're very, very happy to be able to continue that momentum. On sustaining political support, well, on the gender agenda and on the SDG 16 agenda, we see 5 and 16 crossing, and we have extremely high-level political support within Canada for the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and we see how that is absolutely key to sustaining peace. The Government of Canada prides itself on its inclusiveness, and on talking to the voices and including voices that have typically been marginalized. It is a part of all the policies within the government, not just its international policy, not just its development policy, its finance policy, throughout. So I think that we will take that into our co-chairmanship of this very important forum. And finally, I would just say that on local approaches and understanding what is needed at the local level in the specific context that is experiencing fragility, that is experiencing conflict. We heard this morning about conflict analyses, about gender-sensitive, gender-informed conflict analyses. All of that's important. And in integrating, in Canada, we've integrated the development agency and the foreign ministry, and that is giving us some really important opportunities to also integrate how we use our political, diplomatic, commercial, humanitarian, and development tools together in these contexts. And that perhaps is something also that we can bring to the platform table to deal with the kind of complexity that the audience here has talked about, and to potentially find new approaches that are as pertinent to civil society partners, to G7 plus partners as they are to the donor community. So we look forward to being able to speak perhaps in a year's time about what we've seen as some of the opportunities that have opened up as a result.
When you'll tell us more about the accountability framework in a year's time.
Wow, you've really put me on the hook.
I'm going to keep you accountable to the accountability.
Thank
I'm just
you.
getting over to you, Habib.
Thank you. So many good questions and comments. Just very quickly, I will conclude with 4 points. One, I would like to inform you about our initiative on the monitoring. We, within the G7 Plus, we took this initiative of choosing one indicator from one SDG, just to provide a flavor of a collective, outcome that we have had so far. And this will be a report that will be launched in the next political high-level forum. And we use the New Deal indicators, as a guidance to, make us, help us in choosing the indicators out of those SDGs. Now, the second point, sustaining peace agenda and conflict prevention. Please, let's not consider it as a project or as a program. It's a principle that has to be invested in our approach. If you talk about conflict prevention, you have to think about how you're going to go and, like the example that was given by the Liberian minister, how can you intervene? You will face a lot of problems of intervention, on sovereignty and all these things. What the right way to this is that we have to reflect it in all our programs. Sustaining peace requires, sustainable jobs. It requires political solutions. It requires, the geopolitical situation that has to be addressed. So it goes into all the pillars of the work that we do: diplomacy, economic cooperation, and all of this. So if you go with that, principle, I think in mind, we will not end up in disappointments. But if we treat it as a project, then forget about it. The second point is financing is the most important thing. It's not only just, the president of the GA mentioned about it as well, but I would say that, sustainable financial resources for the countries. We're not talking about, only financial resources for the peacekeeping operations. If that $1 investment, it should not be taken as that, $1 investment in peacekeeping operation. It should be $1 investment in the countries where it's needed. And I think that is one of the expectations of the G7 platform, the international dialogue, through the INCAF, all these donors, that they have to maintain that political support, that these countries should not be left behind. They are already farthest left behind. And we include countries which are aid orphan. They are dependent on aid, and we need that political momentum to support these countries. And my last point is I would like to thank the Sweden government for a great job. Minister Lovin has been a great, supporter with all her colleagues, Göran. But I think the job is not done here. It doesn't mean that you will give up on us. I was just speaking to Minister Lovin that, we still need that support. And we congratulate Canada, and we are looking forward to that. To facilitate the accountability, yes, I would also be, clinging to this. Accountability among ourselves, please hold us accountable as well. But also, please facilitate accountability among the international community. All these donors that, have signed up to the New Deal, they have to be accountable. And we have this forum where we can speak frankly. Where are the challenges? If you are going to convince your parliament on the use of the country system, we can help you, and we can go and we can talk to them. But we just need to have that political momentum and that support. Thank you.
Don't worry. I know we're holding you back from lunch, but they wanted a phased lunch anyway, so you wouldn't have been eating regardless, so we'll keep you for a few more minutes.
I'm actually introducing in one of the high-level discussions for lunch now in 5 minutes. But very briefly, I think with regard to accountability, I might have a concrete example that could be used, and that is the process that we have within the OECD DAC with regard to peer review mechanism. We can really hold each other to account and see if we act in line with our experience and what we have decided upon, and then develop those mechanisms to see that we have improved accountability with regard to good donorship. So that might be something. I also wanted to pick up on the important issue of the need for political support. Well, I think all of us know that politicians want to invent the ideas on their own. And if we look upon the IDPS and the experience and the principles and the indicators or whatever as a real true offer to the implementation of pathways for peace or goal 16 or whatever framework each country and politician would like to use, then we have a very good offer. So I think to continue to sell and to develop the experience of the principles and perhaps also the indicators, but based really on true stories and country experience, can be a very good offer to any politician. But it's the way we package it, and we don't need to sell it in the same kind of package everywhere, but actually try to find, as we have been trying to do also with the Swedish chairmanship, to bring in the experience as a concrete tool and offer into new processes. And it's really needed because, we have now a World Bank group that has really strong muscles, or at least will have when we have made the payments, as we discussed now in the spring meeting. And we have new actors, such as the World Bank, who enter into the scene with these really strong muscles, but we need them to pick also our brain with regard to the experience and see to that they are being taught at least what we have learned so far with regard to efficiency and the peace and Statebuilding Dialogue. And I think pilot countries, some of them were really good examples, and some had a lack of political ownership and didn't really want to be part of the project. We need a more flexible approach then. And we need to invite and once again see if there is interest to learn and to make good use of these tools that we can offer as part of the platform. So I think it's a good idea to have pilot countries, but be a bit flexible with regard to the approach.
No, people are lining up at the doors. So, Peter, last word to you.
I will be very short. I mean, I fully subscribe to the idea of accountability and being better in following through on the commitments that we have made. I think that we should do. I also think that it requires more investment in building up our track record and being able to disseminate our learnings from the last 10 years. And I think we are working on that as we're backtracking back to what we have done. I think we can tell great stories, and we should tell and continue to tell these great stories. But it's also one important point to emphasize. I mean, the international dialogue is also a forum for political dialogue, and I also want us to commit to having that open and frank dialogue continuously, because that will help also these kind of change processes. It will also help in a process where we can hold countries accountable for steps that they're taking or they're not taking. So let me stop. Final point is that I want to congratulate Canada on being the new co-chair, and thank to Sweden for an excellent job. Thanks.
So I won't wrap up because I think we're already running very late, and we've had good note-taking, which I'm sure will be circulated. So thank you all for your attention, and to the speakers.